With the chant we did this morning. I don't know if you were all here this morning. We're going to learn, because it's theory and practice, we're going to talk about the theory of the Divine Mother within a Jewish context, and then two practices, they're chanting practices. So this one we did earlier. I know it's very hard to read it's a small sign and I write terribly, but the two words are Ha-Rachaman and then Hareh. Hareh is to behold. Ha-Rachaman literally means the compassionate one. And Ha means the, and Rachaman is compassionate one. It's one of the names of the Divine Mother, Rachaman. And it's true in Arabic, it's true in Sanskrit. It's a very common name. And the way I was taught is the way to invoke the Divine Feminine is through chanting. So that's what I'm going to teach you as part of the practice. But just to set this up this afternoon, I want to start with that one. And then we'll take a look at the texts. So we did it with the little wake-up thing. When you get to the Hare part, you find someone, you can get up, move around, and just wake everyone up for the afternoon. Behold, behold the Divine Feminine, you're it, I'm it, you're tapping each other on the forehead. Harachaman, 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 Hare Hare, Harachaman. Harachaman, 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 Hare Hare, Harachaman, 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 Hare Hare, Harachaman, 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 Hare Hare, Harachaman. Okay. It's always hard in the afternoon. People are tired. We had a lot to drink, a lot to eat.
What?
Yeah, drink. Yeah, I don't know. So when a rabbi especially, but Jews in general, but a rabbi especially, comes to talk about the Divine Mother, it must send out all kinds of vibrations into the universe, because this is not what Jews talk about. And it's not something I chose to experience. You know, when you're raised Jewish, and I was raised in an Orthodox Jewish environment, Orthodox home, Orthodox synagogue, very, not ultra-religious, but solidly observant of all the rules. You go to synagogue every day, you pray hundreds of pages of liturgy, and nowhere are you praying to or learning about the Divine Mother. God is a man. And even though if you say that to the rabbis, they will say no, and then you say, oh, well, then we could say, God the Mother. They'll say, no, you can't say that. So the way you know that God is a man is because you can't say God isn't. You can't say God is a mother. So I didn't grow up with this at all. What happened to me was, let me put it this way. I was radically I was a non-dual fundamentalist. When I started, I graduated from rabbinical school. It's a 5-year program to become a rabbi after college, in my case, after graduate school. And I was a committed non-dualist. And I changed all of the liturgy in my synagogue so that it was non-dual. I didn't change the Hebrew because it was too hard, but none of my members understood the Hebrew anyway, So I changed the English, so when they thought they knew what they were saying what I believed, not what the Hebrew said. And I took out all of the he's, and I took out all of the God is the king and all that kind of stuff. And I talked about God as the absolute, God as the source and substance of all reality, those kinds of terms. And I had to start my own synagogue. Usually what happens, you graduate after seminary and you go to work as an assistant somewhere. And you learn the ropes. And then eventually you get your own synagogue. And you're supposed to move up the ranks. So you start with first as an assistant, then a small synagogue, and then a bigger synagogue, and then a bigger synagogue. And you have to be in the field, the rabbinic field, for a certain number of years before you can qualify to apply for these bigger and bigger synagogues. I knew I could not find a job as an assistant anywhere. I couldn't be anybody's assistant. Now, I don't play well with others. I just, I have my own opinions, and that's all I really care about. So I went and I started my own synagogue. I had some friends living in Miami, Florida, and they wanted to do something, and I said, okay, let's just see what we do. Let's just see what happens. And my wife was willing to take the risk financially, and so we just put an ad in the paper one day, and 80 people showed up, and about 20 of those stayed after a couple of times, and we built a synagogue out of that. And I didn't want to be a full-time rabbi. I wanted the synagogue to be a sort of a think tank to experiment with my ideas because I wanted to write books. So I kept it small. We were never bigger than 200 households, so maybe 500 people. And we operated in a little house, and it was perfect. Everything was just the way I wanted it. Completely non-dual, no imaging of God whatsoever. And then I started having experiences of the Divine Mother. I mean, like I would see her. That's bad for business. When I'm building a whole reputation on this theology that is, there's no image, there's no gender, there's no nothing, and all of a sudden I'm experiencing what clearly to me is the Divine Mother. So I try to get rid of it. And the first person I go to is, I mentioned her earlier, Sister Jose Habde. And we were teaching together at the Aspen Institute in Colorado. And during one of the breaks, I went to her little apartment that we each had our own place, and I went to hers, and I explained to her what was happening. And I said, look, this is what happened. I'm sitting at home in Miami, and I'm reading the Miami Herald, the newspaper. And on the front page, the fold, above the fold, there's this gorgeous picture of the Virgin Mary. Beautiful watercolor. I mean, I can't describe the purity of the color, and it was just this modern painting. And I was so taken with it, I couldn't stop staring at it. I was absolutely pulled into it. And then it dawned on me that if I flipped the paper over, I could find out what gallery was showing this painting, and I could go see it. So I flipped the paper over, and I found out it wasn't a painting. It was an oil slick on the side of a building, and that people were seeing Mary in the swirls of colors. So I flipped it back over. I said, no, what are you talking about? It's clearly Mary. And then I flipped it back and said, no, it's not. Then I flipped it back. Yes, it really is. And hundreds of people were flocking to see this image of Mary, and I felt drawn to do it too. But Jews don't do that. And my reputation was no image. So I didn't do a thing. So then I think payback, she kept coming to me in different forms. It was like, okay, you don't want to see me in the paper? How about you see me over here? How about I talk to you over here? And I was having all these experiences that I could not deny that were clearly the Divine Mother in one form or another. So I went to Sister Jose. I explained what was happening. I said, how do I get rid of this? And she just laughed at me. She said, you can't get rid of it. You have to share it. And I said, I'm not going to share it because that's the end of my career. And she said, well, you actually have no choice. So I said, of course I have a choice. I believe in free will. Not anymore, but I used to. And I left, and we were friends. I thanked her, and I went off. And then that afternoon at the Aspen Institute, I had a speech to give. And whatever it was this talk that they had asked me to give. And I got up and I opened up my notes. I couldn't read a thing. I just talked about the Divine Mother. She's in the back of the room, Sister Jose, going, I told you. I told you. I'm in the front going, ah. So as soon as I started opening to it, just the possibility of it, I started having more experiences. Now, I'm not claiming any mystical thing here. It's just I kept seeing her, and I started hearing her voice, like she was talking to me. Now, I don't take this. I don't want to make more of this than what I really feel. These are real experiences. They're happening inside me somewhere, but I'm not claiming any special status that she chose me, nothing like that. That's not the claim I'm making. This is just what I'm experiencing. So then I go to one of my swamis, and I said, look, I'm a non-dualist, and now I'm having images of God as other, and this can't be right. How do I get rid of this? And he said to me, he says, no, if God is everything, God is also the other. You don't have to get rid of it. It doesn't violate your theology. It's just that you're too narrow-minded in what you think is true. So that made a huge, I love that. I said, wow. So these things kept opening me up, but I still didn't like it. I couldn't tell my congregation. I mean, they would have been totally freaked out by the whole thing. So I went to my third person. I went to Andrew Harvey. You know Andrew? So Andrew Harvey is a devotee of the Divine Mother in all her forms. And he and I were teaching in Phoenix, Tucson. And afterwards, we were leaving. We're flying out at the same time, different flights. And we're sitting in the airport. And I said to him, I got to tell you what's happening to me. And you have to make it go away. So I explained to him this whole thing, which was now much bigger than just my Miami Herald experience. Now, if you know Andrew, Andrew is very flamboyant. He is not a quiet person. He's very, very loud and large and alive. We're in the airport in Tucson, and I explain what I'm going through. And I'm hoping he's going to say something like, well, you know, Rami, if you just meditate on this, or you do this, it'll go away, or you chant this, it'll just, clear your mind. Instead, he goes, my dear Rami, like that, he's exploding. He says, my dear Rami, this is the most marvelous thing that could ever happen to you. It's going to be terribly painful. It's going to be awful. It's going to be suffering that you've never experienced before. How blessed are you? And she's going to come and she's going to strip you naked of everything. And he's going on and on and on. And people in the airport are going, oh my God. They're trying to give us more space to get away. He's really loud. And he's telling me that I'm going to have horrible experiences as Mother Kali just takes everything away until I can't hide behind anything anymore. That's what he says. Hasn't happened yet. I'm still hiding. But he was right about much of it. The experiences became more intense and more liberating, but not in a way that I was surrendering to what was happening. She was just taking when I was clutching so tightly. My conditioning, we were talking this morning about, freeing yourself from ethnicity and religion and gender and all those things. And it's not like I don't believe. You can go, okay, I'll give up this, I'll give up that. Like it's something you can just put aside. I think it's like an alcoholic trying to give up drinking. You have to hit rock bottom. And my experience with the mother was that she took me to rock bottom. And then I found out that there's really, for me, there was no one rock bottom. It was like when I thought I hit rock bottom, and I said, okay, this is it. I can live with this. She says, oh, really? Vroom, and she'll take the rug out from under me, and I fall some more. And I kept having these experiences of being stripped of all the things that I loved. Now, some of it was external, my jobs and all things like that. But mostly we're talking internal states, things that I just clung to my entire life that I just believed were true. And it's not that I ever lost being a non-dualist, it's just that I didn't know what it was until my experiences with her. But eventually, I got to a place where I expected this constant falling, resting, and then she'll pull it out from under me and falling again. And I realized I was very frightened of it, but I was frightened because I thought I was going to hit some terrible, awful bottom. And then what I realized since, and this is years and years ago, what I realized was there's no bottom to it. That eventually, what I came to the realization that you're just falling into the Divine Mother's arms. And there's no bottom to that. She's infinite. And so there's just a falling. But every time you clutch something, the grace of, her grace is to take it away from you, and you keep falling. So I now call it divine free fall. And it's just a real radical sense of, in what in Zen we call not knowing. You just don't know. Everything that I teach is tentative. I don't know it's true. It's true for me at the moment. But if I hold on to it, if it becomes conditioning for me, then she takes it away. Is that, you follow that? I mean, I'm not saying you have to believe what I'm saying, or certainly not saying you have to agree with what I'm saying. But I want to be clear. This is sort of to give you the introduction to this. So all of this was happening outside the Jewish frame that I was raised in. And I think that was necessary because I had seen her in Judaism but never recognized it. You know, I'll show you what I mean. So, in Judaism, we go through the Bible all the time. I mean, that's what we do. And in the book of Proverbs, which I had read multiple times, and I've actually written 2 books on it, I never really got that she was in there. So all of a sudden, though I've seen it a million times, all of a sudden I'm reading the book of Proverbs, and I'm coming across chapter 8, verse 22. Now the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, is this overwhelmingly masculine book. I mean, there are some women heroes. In the book of Genesis, according to, he's emeritus now, but Yale Bible scholar Harold Bloom, he writes, his theory is that the book of Genesis was actually written by women. And all those early stories about Adam and Eve and all that, they were all written by women to make fun of men. And I'll share with you the Adam and Eve one in a minute. And that they were just women writing stories for women, a little group of literary women writing stories for one another that somehow became the Bible. You know? So that's his theory, because the men are all sort of doofuses, and the women are the ones who move the story forward. So I'm going to come back to Genesis in a minute, but I'm reading the book of Proverbs, and all of a sudden, in this heavily masculine book, this woman starts to speak. She's not a character in a story. Her voice is just her. She's just speaking, and it's not speaking to me personally. You can look it up in the text. Chapter 8, verse 22, she says, God is my source, and I am God's first creation. Before time, I am. Before beginnings, I am. So if you have a Christian background, this should resonate with John, you know, before Abraham was, I am. She's making the same statement hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus. There were as yet no oceans when I was born. There were as yet no oceans when I was born. No springs deep and overflowing. I am older than mountains, elder to the hills, the valleys, and the fields. Before even the first lumps of clay emerged, I am. Now, when you read I am statements in the Hebrew Bible, we erased it from earlier, but you know, when God says to Moses who he is at the burning bush, and he says, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, I am the I aming of the universe, and the word they use, shorthand, is the 4-letter name of God, the Yahweh we talked about earlier. She's making the same reference. She's saying, that's who I am. When God set the heavens in place, I was there. When God fixed the sea's horizons, I was there. When God made firm the sky and set the fountains that feed the sea, when God bound the ocean with shore and the sand with sea, I was there. Now, you don't get this in Genesis. That's not what Genesis tells us. This is a whole different theology. This is a whole different creation story. She was present at all these moments of creation, but not just present. She says, it's all in chapter 8 as the 20s unfold into verse 31. She says, I was God's confidant and architect. Now the Hebrew's a little vague. This is my translation from the Divine Feminine book. But the Hebrew's a little vague. It could say builder and child. It's not exactly clear. But I was God's confidant and architect, a source of endless delight, playing before God without ceasing, rejoicing in creation, delighting in humankind. She is Shakti to his Shiva, to God's Shiva. She is the active element of creation. Ultimately, we discover in the other books of wisdom, there are certain books in the Hebrew tradition, not the Hebrew tradition, in the Jewish tradition, because some of it's in Greek, that are called the wisdom books. In Judaism and Protestant Christianity, we don't read all of them. It's very sad. And I don't know, Bishop, if you use the Apocrypha. So in Bishop's branch of Christianity and in Catholicism and in the Episcopalian Church, they read the entire Jewish scripture from Genesis to Revelation. And in the middle, you have books like The Wisdom of Solomon and Ben Sirach. And so in what's called the wisdom tradition within Judaism is Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes, and then the rabbis quote from but do not accept as canon Sirach and the Wisdom of Solomon. The last two are in Greek, the others are in Hebrew. So those 5 books sort of make up the corpus of the wisdom literature. Some people think Song of Songs belongs in there also. I'm going to be doing a couple of workshops this year on Song of Songs as part of the wisdom tradition. But the academic world doesn't accept that. But when you look in these books, you find out there's this feminine principle that is essential to creation. She is, and I'm going to read this to you from the Wisdom of Solomon, she is the manifest divine energy. When we see the world, we're seeing her. She arises from the unmanifest. So again, I don't want to make a hard and fast distinction that there's manifest or unmanifest. There's the reality, the divine, unmanifest and manifest. Like with the, sometimes you see the goblet, sometimes you see the faces, figure ground. Depending on what you're focusing on, God is unmanifest or God is manifest. When God is unmanifest, we have the Yud He Vav He. When God is manifest, we have this woman. Now, her name in all these texts is Chochmah, not Shekhinah. Shekhinah comes a little bit later. Her name is Chochmah, C-H-O-C-H-M-A-H. C-H-O-C-H-M-A-H. And the mystics take that word. It literally means wisdom. They break it into 2 parts, and they say it's Choch-Ma. Ma is one of the mystical names of the manifest God, and the Choch means like power. So it's the power of the manifestation, the power, there's no good English, the manifesting power of God, if you like. So in the book of wisdom of Solomon, Solomon is talking to us, and we learn, I think it's Kings, Solomon is going to become king, and he doesn't feel ready, and he prays to God, and God will grant him anything. But he doesn't pray for power, he doesn't pray for an army, he doesn't pray for that. He prays for wisdom, and God says, because you pray for wisdom, not only will you have wisdom, but you'll have everything else also. But he only talks to us about wisdom. And he does it in different ways in different books. But this is what he says in chapter 7 of the book of wisdom. For it is the ineffable who gave me unerring knowledge of what exists, to know the structure of the world and the activities of the elements. So this unerring knowledge is wisdom. Now, you can't tell from the English, but wisdom is feminine. All Hebrew is gendered. So Chachma is a feminine noun. And it becomes the name for this woman. They call her in English sometimes Lady Wisdom. So he's talking about this woman, this divine character. And it comes from Yahweh. So she arises from, she's the dynamic element energies of the unmanifest. So she's the manifest deity. And it's through her, and he says this explicitly at the end, that he comes to know about everything that exists, to know the structure of the world and the activity of the elements. So it's not just some mystical thing. He knows biology, he knows cosmology, chemistry. In the beginning, he knows the beginning and the end and middle of times. So he knows how everything is unfolding. The alternations of the solstices and the changes in the seasons. So he's got this whole understanding of the natural world. The cycles of the year and the constellations of the stars, the natures of animals and the tempers of wild beasts, the powers of spirits and the reasonings of the mind, the varieties of plants and the virtues of roots. So he mixes it all in together. But we're talking about botany and medicine and the powers of the reasoning of the mind, psychology. He sees every aspect of the world that you and I experience as coming from her. I learned both what is unmanifest and what is manifest. For wisdom, now this is Chachma, this is the woman, right? Because again, you can't tell from English. For wisdom is the fashioner of all things, and she taught me. Now, if you just go by the English translation, you won't know that, the she part, because it'll just say, the fashioner of all things taught me. But you have to know the grammar. So the grammar tells you that this fashioner of all things is feminine. So the universe that you and I inhabit is the work of the Divine Mother. For in her, now we get a sense that even the English, and this is standard English, not my translation. This is standard English from the New English version of the Bible. Now it puts in the pronouns. So it says, for in her there is a spirit that is intelligent, holy, unique, manifold, subtle, mobile, clear, unpolluted, distinct, invulnerable, loving the good, keen, irresistible, beneficent, humane, steadfast, sure, free from anxiety, all-powerful, all-seeing, and penetrating through all spirits that are intelligent and pure and most subtle. So the idea here is that she's flowing through everything, but if you can't see it, if you're not pure enough to see it, you won't see it. So I'm going to come back to that text. There's more to it. But let's talk about this being pure. By pure, we're not talking morally pure. That's not the issue. Solomon is not a morally pure person. Right? He's got, I don't know how many wives and 900 concubines, and he's gets himself into lots of trouble. So we're not talking about someone who's a saint. In fact, if you read the book of Ecclesiastes, which I've also translated and written 2 books on, he's not a saint. He even tells you, look, I don't know if wisdom is even worth it. So I'm going to try stupidity for a while. And I'm going to go and become an alcoholic. And I'm going to go and become a hedonist. And I'm going to go and have, do all these other things. And then in the end he says, wisdom is better than all those things. But then he says, but don't think just because you're awake and you're wise that you don't die. He says, the fate of the wise and the fate of the foolish is the same. We all die. But the time that you're alive, the wise live it much more effectively than the fools. So the purity we're talking about is not some kind of moral perfection that we can attain. Think of purity the way, a better term than purity, because purity is so loaded with morality here. Think of transparent. So we talked earlier about removing all of the conditioning that clouds our vision so we can see clearly. This is saying that those of us who can see clearly see wisdom, see Lady Wisdom, see Chachma. So how do you get this purity? Well, from the Jewish point of view, it's a given. You're born that way. Every morning, an observant Jew, whether Orthodox or just like myself, I don't consider myself Orthodox. I observe a lot of the traditions, but when I'm home with my parents, it's clear that their Judaism is much more rule-oriented than my Judaism. But every morning, an observant Jew recites the following prayer. And I'll do it for you in Hebrew, then I'll translate it for you. So in Hebrew, it's Elohai nishema shenatata bi tehorahi. Elohai nishema shenatata bi tehorahi. So you chant that over and over again. And what it says is Elohai neshama. It says, Elohai is my God. Neshama is the spirit, the consciousness that you place in me, because you're just coming back into waking consciousness. The consciousness that you place within me, Tehora he. So she is pure, transparent. So Elohai neshama, my God, the consciousness you breathe into me, shenatat, my God, it says, the consciousness, shenatatabi, that you place inside of me, tehorahi, she is pure. In Judaism, everything having to do with the spirit is feminine. Whether you're female or a male, all dimensions of the soul, and we talk about 5 of them, all of them are feminine. Whether you're masculine or feminine, your body is masculine. So the way, even though in what we were reading a moment ago, the manifest world is the work of the mother, your body is considered masculine, but the wisdom that it contains, the consciousness that it contains, and there's, again, 5 levels. There's a physical level, an emotional level, an intellectual level, a level of sort of the cosmic level, and then the absolute non-dual level. All 5 levels are feminine. So everyone has this, when we're working within the spiritual dimension, we're always working with feminine elements in Judaism. So this neshama, this consciousness that is placed in us, is pure, is transparent, unclouded, undistorted, innately capable and ready to see what is as a manifestation of the divine. The only one they talk about among the 5 is this middle one, neshama. And that's because the physical consciousness that runs your body is fine the way it is. It knows what it's doing, and then it doesn't do it so well, and then you die. So it knows how to do that. Your emotional consciousness knows what to do. It's the fight or flight response. It's the fundamental emotions of love and fear. You're born with those. You know, when you're a little baby and some giant tiger comes growling at you, you don't have to think about crying and being scared. You just get scared. So those things are just, they run fine. The top 2, the 4th one is called chaya. It means life consciousness. It's when you're aware of all beings as unique manifestations of the singular reality of the divine. And then the top one is called yechida, where you no longer see separate beings, you only see the divine. So those 2 also never get clouded. You can't stain. It's what Krishna says to Arjuna in the Gita. You really cannot sin when you're following your karmic duty. So here it's something like that. But here it's those 4 levels, the bottom 2 and the top 2, they operate fine, and there's nothing you can do to screw those up. But the middle one is where your ego comes in. And even though every morning it's placed in you pure, undistorted, by the time I get to brush my teeth, it's already filled with conditions. I walk, by the time I go to the bathroom, I see myself in the mirror, bam, I see myself through the lens of habit. But I get up first, before I actually get out of bed, and I go, Elohai neshama shenatat bi tehorahi. I'm reminding myself, that's not you. The habitual person you see in the mirror, that's just a construct. See through that. Get rid of the conditioning, lech lecha, like we talked about this morning, and you'll see everything as it is. And everything as it is the happening that is the Divine Mother. You follow what I'm saying? So part of the practice is to chant that over and over and over again. But there's so many things you could do. I didn't want to get us bogged down. So the purity that she is the purity that we need to attain is already a given. You don't have to go to a teacher, you don't have to go to a book, you don't have to go to a center, you don't have to go through any specific meditation process. Theoretically, you can just say, hey, I don't need all these blinders, just drop them. But I don't know anyone who's ever done that. Maybe Ramana Maharshi or something, but I haven't done that. So we practice chanting and meditation and all the things that we do here, all the things I do in other places and at home. To me, they're all about cleaning the conditioning off, to see through the pure lens that I already have. So he goes on. For wisdom is more. So those of us who are intelligent and pure and most subtle, cleaned of all these things, we can see her as the manifesting divine. And then he goes on to say, and it's not much longer, for wisdom is more mobile than any motion. So, not emotion, any motion. She's more mobile than motion. Now, what does that mean? How could it be more mobile than mobile? How could it be more moving than moving? So I went to one of my teachers in this and I said, what are we talking about? I thought God was unchanging. And he said, if God is unchanging, then nothing could ever happen. You can't lock God into being unchanging, and you can't lock God into being changing. So I said, oh, well, then how am I supposed to understand this? And he said, God is change. Change never changes. But it's never the same thing twice. It's Heraclitus who says you can never step into the same stream twice because it's moving. So it's always, where I live, it's the Columbia River. So it's always the Columbia River, but it's never the same river from moment to moment because the content is moving. So it's always the divine, but the divine is never static. So I was thinking unchanging as in static, but it's not that. There's a mobility that transcends just the ordinary changes. It's something bigger that allows that to happen in a larger context. So wisdom reveals to us what's more mobile than any motion, the constancy of change. The Buddhists talk about this a lot. And so maybe you can find Buddhist language that works. And then he says, because of her pureness, she pervades and penetrates all things. So in this, if we were Taoists, it's very much like the Tao. So wisdom in the Jewish tradition, or this is now part of the Christian tradition also, she's like the Tao that's manifesting the 10,000 things. In fact, some of this stuff will actually sound very, even in this standard English translation, will sound very much like the Tao Te Ching. For she is the breath of the power of God and a pure emanation of the glory of the ineffable. Therefore, nothing defiled gains entrance into her. For she is a reflection of eternal light, a spotless mirror of the working of God, and an image of divine goodness. Now again, when they mean goodness, because we get this in Genesis too, and this is all part of the same tradition, when God looks at the world and says, it's good, from the Jewish perspective, we don't mean that it's morally good or that bad can't happen. Better, it's complete. And complete means whole, meaning both yin and yang, good and bad. So when Jesus says, for example, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect, he doesn't mean morally perfect. Because that's the end of Christianity then. The whole point of Christianity is Jesus comes for the sinner, not for the perfect. So it's not perfect in that morally perfect sense. It's perfect in the sense that it includes everything. It's perfect in the non-dual sense, I guess. So it includes imperfection. It includes whatever this greater reality is. It includes, like we read from Levi Yitzchak, the good and the bad, and it's all part of God. But it's the part that's manifesting, and that's the mother, if you're following this. Now this is the part that sounds so Taoist. Solomon writes, Though she is but one, she can do all things. And while remaining in herself, she renews all things. In every generation she passes into holy souls and makes them friends of God and prophets. For God loves nothing so much as one who lives with wisdom with her. So there's this thread running through Judaism and then Christianity that is the wisdom thread. And it's not about faith, and it's not about good works. You know, those all have a place to play in Judaism and Christianity, certainly. It's about, this is like jnana yoga. Now, this is wisdom yoga. Understanding the nature of nature and understanding it so deeply that you realize it's a manifestation of the mother, who is in fact the manifesting power of the absolute, which includes unmanifest and manifest, if that makes any sense. So how does this play out? What do we do with this? And why is it all around the feminine? So let me go back to the book of Genesis and tell you the story of Adam and Eve in a way that you've never heard it before, but in a literal way. You know, when I taught Bible at the university, my students would come in. They knew Bible better than I did, but they only knew the 20 or so passages they needed to know to convert people who didn't believe like they did. So those are the parts they knew. But I said, how many of you take the Bible literally? And almost everyone would raise her hand. Because it's the South, and they're very fundamentalist where I live, and they believe the Bible is literally true. I said, okay. So when Jesus says, let the dead bury the dead, is he talking about zombies? And then they would all say, no, that's stupid. Of course he's not talking about zombies. It's a metaphor. Aha, okay. As long as, if that's a metaphor, then, and you know it's a metaphor, then it's not literal. Now that you're not taking the Bible literally anymore, let's go see what it has to say to us. But I want to take the Bible literally in the Genesis passages, in this one, the story of Adam and Eve, because the fact that we don't has caused untold harm to women for the last 3,000 years, maybe more. Everything in the Western world, let's say, the Judeo-Christian Islamic world, everything in that Abrahamic world that is touched with misogyny, women hatred, can be traced back to the story of Adam and Eve. Because all evil comes into the world through Eve. Right? That's what it says. Right? Everything is great until she eats the fruit and gives it to Adam, and then he eats it. And then there's what in Christianity we call the fall. In Judaism we call it the exile. We don't have a fall, they're just kicked out. Everything that's wrong with the universe, with the world, us, can be traced back to her. It's her fault. And that means it's, Sharada's fault. Right? And it's every woman's fault. And that's why women can't be trusted, and that's why women can't have leadership positions, and that's why, because look what they did to us boys through Adam. That's when you don't read the story literally. Let me tell you the story literally. So it starts out, God gives the commandment to Adam only, don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Adam, we guess, tells it to Eve. She hasn't got a name. Adam just means man or human, and Eve is just called the woman. Not his wife. In a lot of the English Bibles, she is called his wife, he is called her husband. They didn't have marriage then. They weren't husband and wife. She gives to her man, he has his woman, that's how they do it. So anyway, the serpent comes and talks to Eve. You know this story, but you don't know literal. So the serpent comes and talks to Eve. So the first question you have to ask is, what's with the serpent? Why does God allow that to happen? Who is this serpent? So it says in our English Bibles that Adam and Eve are naked. The word is arumim, A-R-U-M-I-M. naked. That just means naked. Then you read about the serpent. Anyone remember what your English Bible might have said? The serpent is the most clever, sometimes different words about it, the most devious animal in creation. The Hebrew describing the serpent is arum. Arumim is plural for Adam and Eve. If they were talking about just Eve or just Adam, they would say arum. They're talking about just the one serpent. They use the same word in Hebrew. It's not that they are naked and the serpent is clever. It's that they're naked and it says the serpent is the most naked. Our English changes it, but the Hebrew uses the same word. The serpent is the most naked. So what does that mean, to be naked? So in the mystical tradition, it means that the serpent is the most transparent. The serpent is the one whose eyes are the most open. Adam and Eve they have the potential, but they haven't got the realization. The serpent has the realization. The serpent knows that it's all a manifestation of the divine. The serpent is the most transparent to the truth. According to the rabbis, who could that be? And their answer is the Messiah. That the Messiah was created at the very beginning of time, even according to the rabbis, before time. And God sends the Messiah to Eve to get Eve to wake up, because God wants you and I to be as transparent, as pure as the serpent, as naked as the serpent. So why does he go to Eve? Because Adam's too stupid. And you'll see why. So he goes to Eve and he tells Eve, you should eat from the tree, and your eyes will be open, he says, and you will be like God. Well, we who believe you should not be like God think that's evil. He's tempting her to be something she shouldn't be. But in the mystical tradition, you are God. Just not all of God. Just like a wave is not all of the ocean, but it's not other than the ocean. You are the divine, just not all of the divine. So from the mystical side, that's a good thing to know that. But in the mainstream, they consider it a bad thing. So why Eve? Because she's the one who can understand this Adam cannot. How do we know? The rest of the story. So he tells her, open your eyes, be like God, eat this fruit, and you'll know good and evil. The tree of good and evil is the tree of yin and yang. It's the tree of all the opposites, up and down, in and out, good and bad, all from a single tree. It's going to awaken her to the ultimate Advaita mindset that allows you to have good and bad in the larger context of whatever the larger context is, the divine reality. So he says to her, eat from that. She doesn't go, okay. He disappears from the story till the end. Then the story says, Eve saw that the tree was good to eat. Comma, Hebrew doesn't have commas, but comma or semicolon. She saw that it was beautiful, comma. She saw that it would open her eyes and make her wise, comma, and she ate. So we've got 4 different things going on here. First, she sees that it's luscious to eat. It looks delicious. Then she sees it's beautiful. Then she sees it'll make her wise, and then she eats. We tend to lump them all together. She sees it's delicious, it looks nice, it'll make her wise, so she eats it. According to the Jewish mystical tradition, what we're talking about are 3 different encounters with the tree of life. She doesn't go looking for it, she's just living her life, but she comes across it and she sees how how delicious the fruit looks. And it's not an apple. Never says in the Bible it's an apple, it just says fruit. In Judaism, we think it's a pomegranate. We think it's a pomegranate because the pomegranate is feminine fruit because it's filled with seeds. So it's very fertile. But it doesn't say that. Anyway, she sees that it's delicious looking, but she doesn't eat it for that reason. If she ate it for that reason, the Bible wouldn't say, and it was beautiful, and it would make her wise. The Bible would just say, she saw that it was luscious, and she ate it. But because it puts in those other clauses, something else must be going on. This is how the rabbis read the story. So she sees that it's beautiful, and she sees that it's delicious looking, but she doesn't eat it. She says, no, I'm not going to violate the only commandment I've got just because something looks tasty. So she goes away. Sometime later, though it doesn't say how long, she has another clause, and she saw that it was beautiful. Something you might want to possess. If you're not going to eat it, maybe you just put it on a shelf. And if that's what she was going to do, it would have said, and she saw that it was beautiful, and she ate it, but it doesn't say that. So the rabbis say, no, she came back, she saw it another time, she's now noticed not just the deliciousness of the fruit, but the beauty of it. But it's not for beauty either that she's willing to take the risk of breaking this one commandment. She's not driven by hunger, and she's not driven by beauty. Comes back another time, and now she realizes that the serpent was right. This will make her wise. And then it says, and she took of the fruit and ate. Wisdom is what drives this woman, soon to be named Eve. But wisdom is what drives her. Not hunger, not beauty, but wisdom. For wisdom's sake, she's willing to risk whatever it is she's risking. She doesn't know what it is, but she's going to die, it says. But they're only a day old. They don't know anything about death. So she's willing to do that. She eats it consciously, deliberately, as an act of willful breaking of that rule in order to become wise. And the rabbis say that's why God chose her. God wanted somebody who wouldn't be driven by appetite, who wouldn't be driven by the love of pretty things, but who would be willing to rebel against ignorance by knowing what would make you wise and going for it anyway. Then what does it say? And she gave to the man who was with her, and he ate also. So she hands it to Adam. Does Adam go, oh, it looks nice, honey, but I'm not going to eat this. And he doesn't say, oh, this is really beautiful, but no, I'm not going to eat it. He doesn't say, oh, this will make me wise. He doesn't say any of those things. He just says, oh, yeah, thanks. Adam in the Bible, in that story, is like Homer Simpson with a donut. He just eats it. And then everything goes wrong. Nothing goes wrong when she eats it. What goes wrong is when she offers it to him and he doesn't go through the process she went through. She controlled her hungers. She controlled her desire for pretty things. And she acted out of wisdom. He acts from hunger. As soon as that happens, everything goes bad. They're ashamed. Before they were naked and it didn't bother them. Now they're naked and they're ashamed. So things are just going down. Then they hide. They hear God coming in the garden and they hide. And then, and you can't tell unless you really look carefully at the pronouns. Some Bibles are good about this, some aren't. But now God says, where are you? And he doesn't talk to Eve. He doesn't care where Eve is. Eve is not his problem, God's problem. Adam is God's problem. Because Adam has now eaten this thing. Something is happening to him. But instead of becoming wise, now he's ashamed. That's the first thing. And now he's hiding, and he says, because I was afraid. What comes from Eve's eating is her eyes open. What comes from Adam's eating is shame and fear. And that's what he's going to pass on. Because that's all he's got. And then you get the punishments. There has to be some punishment. God said God would kill them, but none of that happens. God says you're going to farm Adam, and it's going to be hard work. And Eve, you're going to have babies, and it's going to be hard work. And the serpent, you're going to go on the ground. That little part of the story is what's called teleological mythology. That's when you look at things that are in the world, you try to figure out why they're that way, and you make up a story. Why is it so hard to farm? And so they say, oh, it's punishment for eating the fruit. Why do women have such pain in childbirth? Well, it's because the punishment from that story. And why are there lizards with legs, but these snakes have no legs? Oh, they used to have legs. That's just a separate teleological. That was science back then. And in fact, still where I live. So I shouldn't pick on. I love the people of Tennessee. So he's only talking to Adam. And he's very angry, does these punishments. Then God says to whomever God speaks, not talking to them, he's talking to we don't know who. And God says, behold, the man, not the woman, the man has eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And in our Bibles, it normally says, and he has now become like one of us. meaning a god. And now I'm going to have to make sure he doesn't reach out his hand and eat from the tree of life and gain immortality, so I'm going to kick him out of the garden. It's all masculine singular. Eve is not part of the fear or the equation. Is that clear? He doesn't say, hey, Eve has become like one of us. He doesn't say, hey, Eve is going to eat from the tree of life. It's just Adam. Now, if you're reading this from a feminist perspective, you might say, oh, that's because it's men and the men don't count the women. But the mystics didn't see it that way. They didn't have that concept. They said, no, there's nothing wrong with the woman. The problem is Adam, because he ate too soon. He didn't go through the process she went through. No discipline, no practice. So, but in our Bibles in English, it'll say, behold, the man has become like one of us. That's not what the Hebrew says. It's a slight change in the way the vowels work, but it says, behold, the man has become like one separate from us. That there's an awareness that Eve has that everything is part of this single system. But Adam, because he ate too soon, before he was ready, only woke up enough to think he's separate now from everything else. He's a part, she knows she is a part of God. He now sees himself as apart from God. Now God says, because of that, I'm worried that Adam, not Eve, that Adam will reach out and eat from the tree of life and gain immortality. The rabbi said what that means is that here's this Adam now who's cut off from the divine. He sees himself as alien. God is now other. And now he's going to eat from the tree of life and be locked into that mindset for all eternity. There's no hope for him. So God says, I'm going to kick him out. Not Eve, right? So God kicks him out. I mean, if you read the Bible, in Hebrew and in good English translation, only Adam gets kicked out. Eve shows up in the next story with Adam. But there's nothing that says she was kicked out. The rabbis teach she walked out because God and she knew that Adam on his own was going to eat up the entire planet. Because all this guy does is consume. And that somebody has got to teach him to control appetite, to get control of his desires for beautiful things, to become wise. That's her job. He must recognize this at some level, because when she shows up outside the garden, he gives her a name. Before it was just, yo, woman, right? And he was just, yo, man. But he now gives her a new name. Her name is Chava. Now, Eve is what we say in English. But in Hebrew, Chava means the mother of all the living. It's like the Tao in the Tao Te Ching. The Tao is the mother of the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sufferings, or the 10,000 things. And Eve is the mother of the living. So she takes on this role of mothering all living beings. But what is her quality for that? Wisdom. Because she's the wise one. So she becomes one of the embodiments of Chokhmah, long before we get to Proverbs. And Chokhmah is her own person. So Eve carries that quality. Then the story's almost over. So then God says, okay, I kicked him out. We have to keep him out. So I'm going to put the seraphim with the flaming sword to guard the way back to the tree of life, unless they, to keep him from coming back in and going to the tree of life. So normally we read that as if God is saying, this is a guard to keep him out. But the whole idea is to get him out with Eve to guide him, so that eventually his children, if not him himself, but eventually humanity will be guided by the mother, by Chokhmah, by wisdom that Eve now embodies, and be ready to come back. The angel isn't there to keep them out. The angel is a big neon sign, putting it in modern terms, saying, this way to the tree of life. When you're ready to come back, the road is safeguarded for you. It's all lit up by this angel with a flaming sword. And today, I guess if we were writing Genesis, it would be one of those airfield things going like this. One of those little dummies out in the road, catch your attention. But that would be the idea. Hey, over here, tree of life, tree of life. So you can come back in. It's all about the prevention of a premature attempt for realization. You have to go through the process that Eve goes through. And Adam wasn't ready. He got it too soon. And now he, meaning us, have to, under wisdom's guidance, prepare ourselves so that we can find our way back. That's a literal reading of the story with rabbinic commentary from the mystical side. It totally turns the feminine thing on its head. The reason that Chokhmah is feminine is because she speaks through Eve, who is feminine. And all these qualities of spirituality are feminine because those are the parts of us that have the capacity to awaken to wisdom. And it's all innate, it's built in. So just as she had to control her appetites, we have to control, it's called nefesh, the physical appetites. Just as we have the second level, which is called ruach, which is the emotions. She learned to control her desire for pretty things. That's the emotional part. We have to learn to control that. And when we do, then eyes are open. That's that third level. We become transparent. The clouds are removed. We see the reality as it truly is. And then we see the two higher levels. Everything is interconnected, and ultimately everything is the divine. So Eve becomes, in the wisdom tradition, the Hebrew Prometheus. She's the one who steals wisdom for us. But it's ultimately God's plan. I mean, that's how the rabbis read it. So let me just stop with that for a second and see if there's any questions before I move on. Yeah?
Is this the general mystical point of view in Judaism?
Luckily for us, there is no general anything in Judaism. It's one of the wisdom, it's in the wisdom school thread. But if you read some of the other mystical stuff, it's as misogynist as anything else. This is a very pro-woman, teaching because it's all about the divine feminine. But you can't say it's the general one. It's just one of them. It's the only one that I like. It's the only one that makes sense to me. But yeah.
Why was Eve punished also?
Well, that's the three punishments for the farming, the pregnancy, and the giving birth, and the snake losing its legs. That's what I did it very quickly. Those are considered teleological stick-ins because they just had to explain why does it hurt to have a baby? They couldn't figure out. Oh, I know why. Go back to that story. So they just threw that in there. But the story itself, the parts that matter, are what I'm sort of laying out here. Anybody else? You get the idea of what we're talking about? Okay. So in this wisdom school of Judaism, I want to broaden Eve a little bit outside of women because you can't say that all women are Eve anymore, but that each person, that Eve becomes the mother, and each person that's our mother. So that we each have access to that divine wisdom inwardly, because we all have those 5 levels of soul. They're all feminine. All of that stuff ties back to her, and we have to take our bodies and turn them inward and find those levels, those dimensions. And when we do, we get to go back to the garden. So what's the garden? The garden is basically what we would call the kingdom of God in the Christian tradition. It's nirvana, not in the sense of blowing out, like the literal understanding of nirvana, where things are blown, or just consciousness is gone, but more in the sense of a qualified, maybe Sat Chit Ananda. So there's that ecstasy that happens when you recognize that everything is the one thing, and the joy that comes from that. Maybe we're talking about something like that. But when that wisdom is realized, I think one of the best places to go to see how it would be lived out, and I'm working just in the Western tradition here, is with Jesus. So let me talk a little bit about Jesus. No, let me check out what my time is. So I'm supposed to stop in 9 minutes. Good luck. Okay, so let me talk very quickly about Jesus. So, Jesus within the Jewish tradition is problematic. Some people think he's real, and some people think he's not real, and he's historical, non-historical. But within the wisdom tradition, Jesus is what John says he is in the beginning. When it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and then the Word becomes incarnate, and and we end up with Jesus. From the Jewish wisdom point of view, the Word, what John calls logos, is what we call chachma, wisdom. You can look at the Jewish philosopher Philo, you can see how the word chachma becomes logos over time. But by the time John is writing in the late first century, maybe at the very end of around 100, when he is writing, logos is the term. Logos is masculine. Somehow there was a gender change in wisdom from the feminine to the masculine. And Jesus becomes the embodiment of logos. But still, it's wisdom. Which is why Jesus surrounds himself with wise women and dumb men. If you look at the apostles, they're all dumb. They don't get it. Who do you think I am? They never really get it. And then when they see what's going on, they run away. Who sticks with him? The women. Who are the first people that he reveals himself to? The women. The guys are hiding. When Mary Magdalene, who becomes sort of like, in a sense, the Eve character in the sense that she is in the Gnostic tradition, she carries this wisdom. It says in the secret gospel of, is it Philip? Or I think it's Philip. But in the secret gospel of Philip, Peter, who's always angry at Mary, Peter hates Mary in these Gnostic gospels, and he's telling her to shut up, and Philip says to Peter, he says, why are you always picking on Mary? Everybody knows that the Lord loved her best. He kissed her on the, and then there's a hole in the text. We don't know where he kissed her. Either a mouse ate it by accident, or someone goes, oh my God, I'm getting rid of that. We don't know. But clearly he was intimate with her in some way. I'm not saying Dan Brown, I don't know that. But he was intimate with some way. And in her gospel, the gospel of Mary Magdalene, she knows things the boys don't have. And when they say to her, tell us what the Lord told you, she says, if I did tell you, you would kill me, you would stone me. But when you tried, the stones would turn to fire and you would be burned up. I'm the only one who gets it. Eve was the only one who got it. Chachma is the only one who is it. They're all women. Jesus embodies the wisdom tradition and actually works outside the official church, obviously, works much more closely with the feminine and with women. So it goes into Christianity. You can read the Gospel of Thomas. There's all kinds of stuff about that in there. So this wisdom tradition is key to this toward a Vedantic Judaism, because again, I suggested that two of the key elements of Vedanta is one being Advaita and one is the Divine Mother. So how do we get in touch with the Divine Mother? So I was taught this method, and I wrote it down here. I don't know if you can even see it. I'm just going to chant it, and you can, if you can see it, you can try it with me. But these are just names of the Divine Mother. So it's Ima, Hare, Ma. So Ima, Hare is behold in Hebrew. So it's mother, behold, Ma. Ma both as in mother, but also the mystical name Ma, which is the divine absolute. Ima Sophia, which is Greek for wisdom. Ima Shechina, so it's mother, behold you as reality. Mother, wisdom. Mother, Shechina. Shechina is the presence of God. When the rabbis felt the presence of God, they called it the Shechina. These are guys who have really negative attitudes toward women, by and large, who, when they were experiencing God in their mystical practices, only could say Shekhinah. They had to use a feminine term. In my mind, the only way that could be is if you couldn't escape it, just like in my own experience. I couldn't pretend I wasn't having that experience. I couldn't pretend that the voice I was hearing wasn't a feminine voice, a female voice. I couldn't pretend that I wasn't seeing female imagery. I couldn't deny that. I'm saying 2,000 years ago, they couldn't deny it either, so they used the word Shekhinah. And then M is mom, Ima is mother, Ima is mom, M is mother. And then Chachma, M. So wisdom, mother. So I'll just chant this for you and you can at least hear it. Ima Harema, Ima Sophia, Ima Shechina, Chachma Ima Harema, Ima Sophia, Ima Shechina, Chachma Ima Harema, Ima Sophia, Ima Shechina, Chachma. And we're taught to do this while you're walking around. You could do it anytime, but we're taught to do it as part of a walking practice. So you're out in the world, and I'm doing it with my eyes closed, but you're out in the world looking around, you go, Ima Harema. I'm seeing her everywhere. And eventually, my experience is, and this is what I was told to expect, but this is my experience also, is that after a while, the chanting becomes silent, and then I do hear her. I begin to see her and hear her. And like I said, the experience is not like, oh, I'll take care of you. The experience is, here, let me take the next thing you're clinging to. She's just this freeing element. So,
Where did that come from?
the chant?
Yeah.
I haven't got a clue.
How old is this?
No, I was taught it, and I never thought to ask, or I don't know. This is just the practice. Do this, and I said, okay, I'll do it, and then it worked, and I have no idea. So let me try to get one last thing in here before we have to stop, and we'll open it up for general questions. Eve is a revolutionary. Eve breaks the rules. God wants rule breakers. Right? The serpent is the Messiah. We know that. I mentioned this morning about taking the Hebrew and turning it inside out. One of the ways you turn it inside out is through numerology. In Judaism, any words that have the same number can be changed. The number in Hebrew for every letter has a number value. The number for Nachash, serpent, is 358. The number for Mashiach, Messiah, is 358. That's how the rabbis know that God is telling you the serpent is really the Messiah, sent to wake you up, Eve, and then hopefully through her to the rest of us. So God wants rule breakers. There's a very famous story in the rabbinic literature about, it's called Acne's oven. Acne is a baker. And Acne wants to open up a new bakery in town. And he wants to buy an oven, and he doesn't want to buy a new one, he wants to buy a used one. So he has to go and get the rabbis to see if the oven is clean, that it can be used for human food. So the rabbis go, and there's 120 of them. The rabbis go, they investigate, they have this big debate, and they decide it is not clean. He can't buy it. Not if he's going to make food for people. One rabbi says, no, it's fine. You're all wrong. And the chief rabbi says, well, it's 119 to 1. You're out. And so his name is Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, I'm right, and I can prove it. He says, the tree in the courtyard is going to prove it. So they all go outside, and they see the tree, and this carob tree gets up on its roots, and like a cartoon tree, walks across the courtyard and replants itself. It's a miracle. Proves that Eliezer is right. So the chief rabbi stands up, and he goes, what does the tree know about ovens? I'm not listening to a tree. So he goes, okay, fine, you don't like the tree. The stream that runs by our property, the stream is going to prove it. So they go out, and the stream is flowing along, and suddenly it just flips over and starts to flow in the opposite direction. It's a miracle. He says, that proves it. And the chief rabbi says, what does the stream know about an oven? I'm not paying any attention to trees and streams. So it goes on like this. And then finally, in frustration, Eliezer says, God will prove it. And then the rabbis have an experience, this, I don't know what you want to call it, but all of them have this experience. They hear what they call a bat, B-A-T, kol, K-O-L. Bat, like bat mitzvah, the daughter, bat means daughter, kol is voice. They hear the daughter's voice. Now, what's the daughter's voice? From Proverbs 8:22, we know that the first thing God birthed was chachma. The daughter is chachma. In Judaism, the Jews hate when you say this to them. I'll say, look, we don't believe that God had a son. We believe God had a daughter. It doesn't help. They get mad. Either way, the daughter's voice is the voice of wisdom. But it's God's voice. They hear it as this feminine voice. So God says, and they all hear it, God says, why are you arguing with Rabbi Eliezer? He's always right. So then the chief rabbi gets up and looks up into the sky, and he quotes from Deuteronomy. There's a passage, and you see something similar in the New Testament, where Moses says to the people, don't think that the Torah, wisdom, the truth, is in heaven, or it's in the sky, he says, because then the birds will get to it before you do. Or he says, who's going to go to the sky and get it for you? Don't think it's across the ocean. Who's going to cross the ocean and get it for you? It's in your heart that you might live it. So he quotes from that, and the opening line is, Lo bashamayim hi, which literally means it's not in the sky. But, what Moses meant when he said it was it's not in the sky. Literally, it means it's not in the heaven. So he looks to God in the heavens, and he says, Lo bashamayim hi, truth is not in heaven with you, God. He says, you told us, he's talking to God, he says, look, you don't have the truth. You told us how to figure these things out. You gave us all these rules about how to read the scripture and interpret it. He says, we figured it out. We voted. That's what you told us to do. We voted it wasn't kosher. The oven's not usable. So you stay out of it. And he tells God to butt out. Turns out that the prophet Elijah is with God at that moment. And later on, the rabbis meet Elijah on the road. And they say, hey, were you with God when the chief rabbi told God to, bug off? And Elijah says, yeah. And they say, well, what did God do? And Elijah says that God fell back on his throne, started to laugh hysterically until tears were pouring down his eyes. And he's calling out in the heavens. He's saying, at last, my children have defeated me. And the idea is that God doesn't want followers. God wants you to become godly. We have the tools. We're supposed to use them. Eve, either in the story or through Chachma, as the divine mother, or through our own working on our spirituality, all these things are interconnected. We have the tools to open up to this wisdom. We don't need to say, God, tell me, God, tell me, God, tell me. That's not what God wants. That keeps us babies. We have to become revolutionaries like Eve. We have to break the rules to get to the truth. But we have to be ready to do that. And that's what the Divine Mother's work is in the world. So she is the manifesting of the universe, but she's also that current in the universe that brings us to godliness. But then I think, and this is my experience, she's also, I don't know what you want to call it, the other, that manifest deity, that I experience when I do my mantra here, within the Vedanta context. She's embodied and is available to us as an other with whom to talk, with whom to have conversation. She's all of those things. And we'll talk about this tomorrow, and that the return of the mother in Judaism and in other traditions, the return of the divine feminine is a hallmark of the radical shift that may be going on in human spirituality. And as we move into that, we are moving, in Judaism now, back to that. But as Jews are awakened to this, and there's not many as yet, we're awakening deeper, or we're deepening our appreciation for what I'm calling, a Jewish Vedanta. So I'm going to stop with that. We'll open that up to comments, and then we'll close with a chanting. And
it looks like you have Abraham and three major religions that branch from Abraham, and you have patriarchy. And with the patriarchy, you have the ability to organize mass societies, which they've really done. And they keep clashing. Now, do you see this has a happy ending somewhere? I think I do. I think we've finally beaten every bloody little pulp, and you finally give up.
Oh, well, that's only because you haven't seen the paper today. We're still beating each other to a pulp. Yeah, it's not over yet.
No.
Do I think it has a happy ending? I don't know. I'm choosing to be optimistic. I'm choosing that eventually someone's going to say, hey, this is stupid, we should stop doing this. But it's all coming from the same Adamic reality when Adam just takes the fruit and gulps it. That's what the patriarchal traditions are about. They're just devouring. They devour the truth as they see it with, I would say, small t. They claim to own it. Their God is the only God. Everyone's divided up into the haves and the have-nots, the chosen and the not chosen, the saved and the damned, the infidel, the true believer and the infidel. That's all what these Abrahamic, that's all what the men do. Now, I don't want to say it's just men, because you can find women in all three traditions that are really transvestites. Right? That they're women on the outside, but they have that same male mentality on the inside. And they are not, the future, the salvation of the human species is not if we turn it all over to women. Because a lot of women have been so impacted by the patriarchy, they just become, men in all, like a rhino, Republican in name only. They'd be women in name only. They're still promoting the same violence, the same, clashing. So it's not that I have hope in women specifically. I have hope in the mother. I have hope in wisdom. I think that she is making a comeback, that people are opening to this. And I think that, and we'll talk about it tomorrow, that Vedanta is one of the ways that she's coming back into the world, and why that is so important, and why people, I think, are ready for it. So yeah, like I said this morning, I want to be hopeful.
So you mentioned this morning that God is reality. And how do we use this knowledge, experience, whatever, as kind of a kedge away from the fact that we could look at God as reality and see reality as being, the day-to-day, everyday reality that is not particularly appealing. But I think you're really saying that God is reality, that this is a mystical experience, that this is uplifting. How do we get to that other side?
Yeah, how do you get...
Having God kind of come down to where we are.
Well, I don't want to say up and down,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we are all a manifestation of that. What we have to do is remove whatever keeps us from knowing that. And I think, mantra practice does that. Prayer practice can do that. Chanting can do that. I mean, there's lots of ways to remove from the neshama, that third level consciousness, the blinders that keep it from seeing, from realizing its own innate purity, its own innate transparency. So there's practice. The problem is how many people do you need to practice to hit that tipping point? And I don't know, but clearly we're not there yet. But I think it can be done. Now maybe it's just one person at a time. I don't know, but I think it can be done. Oh yeah, very, very brief thing. I was first introduced to Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda and the Vedanta whole approach to Hinduism in high school. Two of my high school teachers had a summer sabbatical. I don't know what was going on with the US government, but they were sending high school teachers to India, and they studied Hinduism. And then they came back and they taught what they called, because they couldn't call it Hinduism, that probably violates some church-state thing, they called it Asian civilization. And we read Houston Smith's, it was then called The Religions of Man. Now it's called The World's Religions. And we read that book, and they taught whatever they taught. And when I read the Hindu chapter, I said, oh my God, that so powerfully speaks to me. And the chapter is just Vedanta, because he's a Vedantan, and he didn't count any other Hinduism. I was so naive about Hinduism. Even when I was a college professor, I once invited a friend of mine who's a Swami to come, and he's a different school, and he starts talking about Krishna as a little blue man. And I said, wait, you don't mean that literally, that he's actually blue? And he said, oh no, he's actually blue. And I said, but isn't everything part of... He had this real fundamentalist notion that was not Advaitin at all, and it was driving me crazy. And my students are going, is that Hinduism? That's not what we learned. So not all Hindus obviously believe the same thing. But I was introduced to it in high school, and then my first guru at the University of Massachusetts was a retired professor from Smith College who taught me about the Divine Mother. And that was her focus, and it was private. We would meet every week, and she taught me about all kinds of Sanskrit, and we studied the Gita together, and we went for walks in the woods, and she showed me what to eat if I was ever lost in the woods. And I kept trying to explain to her, I'm Jewish. I don't go in the woods. If I'm lost in the woods, I call for help. I don't. So, but, you know, it was survival things. But she taught me about the Divine Mother, and I worked with her for a long time on that. So I just sort of was involved in that area. But when I started studying with Swami Atmarupananda in the, maybe 2000 or so, I don't know when we started, in Spiritual Paths Foundation Institute, he and I were part of the faculty, and we would meet several times a year to teach, and I would learn from him. And even though we had wonderful teachers in Buddhism and Sufism and Christianity, people I really loved and loved learning with, I really resonated. It was like all my high school, oh, this is so great, came back. And I worked with him for 10 years, and then I said to him, I really want to go farther. I'd like to get initiated. And he said he couldn't do that, but Swami Swahananda, he thought he could, because that was his Swami. So Swahananda said, yes, this is just a few months, I guess, a year maybe before he died. And I went to the center in Hollywood, and Swami was in bed, and they thought, there's no way he was sick. They said, no way he's going to do this. They told him I was here, and he got up, and he got dressed, and he says, they thought, well, just do it in your bed. And I said, no, I'm coming down, and we went to the chapel, and he did the whole initiation. And then I've been practicing to the best of my knowledge anyway, since then. So that was maybe 3-4 years ago, I'm not sure. But that's a quick thing.
I was puzzled when you said earlier this morning that God is becoming. I am becoming the becoming. But it defies the whole notion of God being perfect. If God is perfect, he cannot be becoming. He's already complete in everything he needs.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. So that's not my understanding of perfect. So if God is static, then nothing can happen. Then you've got to figure out how you get from a static to an active deity. What's the connection between Shiva and Shakti? So my understanding of perfection is whole. That the distinction between unmoved and moving, unmanifest and manifest, those, it's like positive and negative. They go together. So God has got to be something bigger than one or the other of those. So yeah, I just have a different approach to this totally. Yeah.
What do you think should be the role of loyalty, experience, and logic in determining someone's spiritual path? And you did say do away with conditioning, so how does that fit in too?
I'm not sure. How does someone find her spiritual path?
Well, I mean, you say a lot of Jewish people choose Eastern paths.
Yeah, right.
And yet others find the mystical Judaism. What is it that makes the difference, and what should...
Maybe karma? I don't know. Accident, if you want to believe in accident. I have no idea. I mean, there's so few rabbis who teach a deep mystical, practical, practice of Judaism. It's hard to find them. And a lot of them that do, they require so much orthodoxy that most people don't want to do it. So it seems easier on the Eastern side. It's not really, but it seems that way.